My name is Yomi Adegake and I'm joined by Oscar award-winning actress Lupita Nyongo to discuss her upcoming Channel 4 documentary. We follow her journey to uncover the hidden story of the highly skilled female fighters who inspired the creation of the Dora Milaje in Black Panther, the Ogogie in Dahomey Kingdom, West Africa. So before we sort of touch on the documentary, we'd like to sort of get to know you a little bit more, if that's all right. Could you tell us a little bit about your childhood? I know that you were born in Mexico but grew up in Kenya. So do you have any favourite memories of Kenya growing up?
I remember spending time in Rata, which is our family's ancestral home, with all my cousins, and running amok and climbing mango trees and eating lots of guavas and taking donkey rides to my grandmother's shop and things like that. And those are very fond memories.
It sounds very idyllic.
Over the holidays, yeah.
So in terms of your acting career, let's sort of take it back a little bit. What was your first job and did you always want to act?
My first job, meaning my first paid job.
Yes.
I was 14 and I played Juliet in Romeo and Juliet in Nairobi at our repertory theatre at the time, which was called Phoenix Players. And I knew I wanted to be an actor from when I was very young, but I didn't really truly admit it out loud until I was about 26.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And there's always that kind of stereotype of African parents sort of being like lawyer, doctor, engineer. Did you experience any of that?
Not at all, actually. I don't have very conventional African parents. My parents raised us all to be like, what do you want to do? What are you interested in? Go out and do it, you know? And so, yeah, I didn't get any resistance from my family. My dad used to be an actor himself when he was in high school and college, and so he was very encouraging. He would always come and see me perform in school. My mom too, she would drive me to rehearsals and wait for me to finish, drive me home. So they were extremely supportive. But I think it's the thing, I was blocked or limited by what the larger society said, you know, and the fact that I didn't see what it was I wanted to be. So I didn't know it was possible for someone like me. All of that rhymed.
Yeah.
I'll let you know.
A second talent that you weren't aware of. So just to sort of follow on about that, you are literally one of the most prominent black women in the acting industry right now. Going from, you know, where you couldn't actually see yourself, metaphorically speaking, to sort of essentially seeing yourself almost everywhere. That must be quite a big change. How are you doing?
Yeah, it's really bizarre. It's bizarre. It's kind of an out-of-body experience when it happens. It doesn't make much sense. You know, like when I was in Benin for this documentary, we were driving along and there was a Black Panther billboard. And, they chose to use the African women in it, and it was me and Danai on the billboard. And it was like, wow, I've never been here, and yet there I am. It's a very odd experience, but also very encouraging to see that and to know that there are kids who are really little, and that will be their norm, to see people like me in the media.
Absolutely, thank you. And just to sort of wheel it back to Kenya for a minute, what's your favourite Kenyan dish and can you cook?
I can cook. I can't cook my favorite Kenyan dish. I like ugali, which is a staple, and kale we have, which I really love, and fish. Dried, sun-dried, and then cooked in spices and lots of tomatoes and onions, and yeah.
So people are definitely going to want to know, when it comes to the jollof wars, which side are you on?
I am on the actual fence. I love them both. I will dip into, but it's not even both. I like all jollof, whether it's from Liberia or anywhere that jollof appears, I will eat it. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. I really love jollof.
Okay, so we're all winners then.
Yeah, I'm the diplomatic one.
So as one of the most prominent black actresses in Hollywood, what do you personally sort of make around the conversation that we're having about colorism? But I guess we're sort of reaching a point where You know, we may be seeing more diversity within that diversity of black women, sort of more dark skin representation.
First of all, I feel very fortunate to be in the position I'm in, and I feel like this is not the time for coming to conclusions. This is the time to do the work. And so it's a time to actually see to it that we have that diversity, that we have that inclusion, and it's in who has the power to cast. It's in who is telling the story to begin with. What is the origin of it? Because when the people who know the experience are holding the pen, are holding the power, and are holding the money, then we see more of that. We will see more of that trickle down to who's in front of the camera. You know, that we're the last ingredient in that long conveyor belt of a production. You know, the actor. But you know, I wrote a children's book to address this very issue, and I just learned that Beyonce just released a song about colorism. So I feel like there is a movement, and there's people speaking up and changing the narrative. And that's where my focus is, and what I can do to change that narrative, to make it that much easier for someone else like me to even dare to dream a bigger dream, and then to see it realized.
Thank you so much. So for those who are yet to watch your incredible documentary, can you tell us a little bit about your journey to Benin, but also what the documentary is generally about?
So the documentary is about the women called the Agojie, who most people know as the Amazons of Africa. And they were a group of women whose job it was to protect the king and the kingdom. So there were about 4,000 of them, and they were in existence 17th, 18th, and 19th century. We know very little about them. They inspired, for example, the Dora Milaje in Black Panther, but in terms of who they were and what they were about, how they came to be, all of that, we really don't know, because their story has been told through the filter of the European reporter, you know. And in their telling of the story, they have been fetishized and over-sexualized and exoticized, and so it's been a rather inaccurate depiction of who these women were. So I was tasked with the job of going down there with Channel 4 and finding out the true story from their descendants, you know, learning from the oral history to kind of rewrite our history.
So how did you decide that you wanted to learn more about the Agojie women?
Well, I was curious about them because, of course, I'd heard, you know, a little bit. I'd heard whispers of like, oh, Amazons of Africa, but what does that really mean and who are they? And I was very aware of how often we have to contend with an outsider's understanding of who we were. So I was really tempted to go there myself and visit and learn that story firsthand. I love the continent I'm from. I'm curious to learn more. I feel like most of my education has been so Eurocentric, you know. I went to a British system school, so I learned about the Thames River, even if I'd never visited it, you know. And I feel like I've been over, you know, I want to say the last decade and a half of my life, I've been very aware of my need to understand the African context, which is what I'm from. Knowing where you're from, knowing about one's history, you know, it really informs who you are in the present and who you could possibly be in the future. And so I wanted to experience this story because of that. I think it helps to give context and dimension to a time in history that you rarely hear about women.
At times, it definitely looked like the journey took an emotional toll and perhaps maybe a physical one. Was it difficult when you were out there filming?
You know, it wasn't difficult. It was hard, for sure. And now I understand why Westerners think all of Africa is hot, because Benin is giving us a bad name, you know, because Benin is actually really hot. But it wasn't hard other than that, because, you know, I've lived on the continent. I've traveled a lot in Kenya. I've gone on long, arduous journeys on terrible roads. I used to do that like 3 times a year growing up, so none of that fazed me. Actually, the tough thing was the emotional for me. Learning the truth about these women, you know, meeting people who saw them as heroes and other people who saw them as the villain in their story. That was hard, and to see the reality of, you know, of what their contributions had given and done to the Benin cultural context today. It was overwhelming, and I just felt like I was full of gratitude and also deeply moved and sad even, because I was just learning so much so quickly.
Yeah, thank you so much. So towards the end of the documentary, it definitely gets quite emotional. I guess it felt like you set out with an idea of what the Ogoja women were like, and I just was interested in knowing what it was like when that idea was later on challenged.
Well, you know, I didn't really go in with any sort of preconceived notions as to who they were, because I knew that I was ill-informed. So I went in with an impression, and my impression went as far as like, oh, they inspired the Dora Milaje. They must be very valiant. But then going in there was valor and vulnerability to these women, you know. It was not all clear cut. And I was really glad that this film was not about passing a judgment. You know, it was not a test to see whether they were worthy of our admiration. You know, it was actually just to tell the story as it is and leave that up to whoever is watching it.
So did any of the process sort of make you think about your own Kenyan heritage and ancestry? And I'm not sure about how much you already know about it, but did any of it make you want to sort of find out a bit more?
Yeah, it really did. And I remember at one point we were sitting with a queen in her courtyard, and they were singing an ancient song of their Goji. At one point they asked me to sing a song from my culture, and I was stumped because every song I know in my mother tongue, Luo, is a Christian hymn. And I know my culture goes further than that, because the Christianity in my culture is from colonialism. And I could not identify one song in my head that was from beyond that. And that made me very, very sad. And I wrote to my parents, I'm like, you guys have to teach me some Luo songs that don't involve Jesus. You know.
So between, you know, films like Black Panther, films like The Lion King, it feels like African storytelling is having a bit of a cinematic moment. Why do you think that is?
I don't know, I'm not a scholar. I'm sure there's someone somewhere who studied this at great length, and I will defer to them. But I think, you know, it's about who has the keys to the cultural door. And that is shifting, you know. It's transforming. But also in the world of cinema where, you know, we're inundated with story from one perspective, there's a hunger for a different perspective. And in some ways, Africa is that frontier. But I think for me, I'm not interested in a trend. I think it's a lifestyle that I'm looking for. A lifestyle where Africa is part and parcel of a global conversation.
Couldn't say that. Thank you so much.